Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Lauren Kuby. I manage Stardust Center for Affordable Homes and the Family. And Stardust was created by philanthropist Jerry Bisgrove to address the urgent needs for housing, quality housing, affordable housing, recognizing that affordable housing is critical to a healthy, sustainable community. So we use the tools of research and education in public forums, such as today's event, to raise awareness and build capacity to highlight the interconnectedness of housing to food access, transportation, shade even, and individual and community health. So today's event and this whole series this fall is in partnership with Island Press. They're a nonprofit book publisher that shines a spotlight on crucial issues of our time, and they focus attention on sustainable solutions. We thank Jen Hawes and Rachel Miller from Island Press. They brought us these thought leaders whose writing lies at the intersection of climate change, housing, energy transition, and activism. So it's now my pleasure to introduce to you John Ford. He's our moderator today, and he is the Director of Strategic Initiatives for Vitalist Health Foundation here in Phoenix. He leverages 30 years of for-profit and nonprofit experience to develop an expanded, innovative network of stakeholders that are focused on all aspects of health and well-being. And key to his work is the development of the Live Well Arizona movement and the elements of a healthy community framework. Who hasn't seen the wheel, the framework wheel that we're referencing? John engages influencers and partners in furthering policy and systems change and is focused on engaging new sectors to catalyze innovation and develop initiatives that further Vitalist's mission and goals. John, you're my favorite moderator. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. What does it mean to be somebody's favorite moderator? I have no idea, but thank you, Lauren. Really appreciate that. I really appreciate the opportunity we have today and would love to welcome Dana Bourland to the screen, if you will. Dana, come on in. Folks, if you're thinking about housing, you need to be reading a book come January. A book called Gray to Green Communities, written by Dana. And thank you, Island Press. Thank you, Dana, for being here. This is a fantastic book that's coming out. By the way, I told Dana I'm hard to please as a reader, and I still thought it was awesome. So Dana, congratulations on an awesome book.
Welcome. Thank you.
So for those, I bet you on this webinar, there's at least 50 people who plan to write the great American novel, but haven't. And the reason is because writing a book is a no small task. So tell us what drove you to do this, to write this book and to make such a great product out of it. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's rather daunting, but and actually something that I had committed to do about 8 years ago and decided to stick with it. And finally, Island Press helped give birth to this story that I felt compelled to write about in thanks, in large part because I felt I needed to say thank you to so many thousands of people who are involved in greening our communities across the country in a wide-scale effort to really provide housing that's affordable to everybody, regardless of race and income. And I had been working on greening affordable housing for about a decade and met so many committed, dedicated, passionate, smart, innovative people. And I felt like I was carrying around the secret because as I read about green building and climate action, we just aren't talking about what is happening in the affordable housing sector as part of the solution, and B, we're not talking about the need to do more. So I felt compelled for those two reasons. One, as a thank you to so many people I met to help lift up their voices and the story of what is happening, and then also to call us all to action to do more.
So let's dig into the book itself. It's coming out January 19th, 2021. I'm guessing somebody's going to put a link to pre-order in the chat. I hope they are. It's called Gray to Green Communities, a call to action on the housing and climate crises. Since nobody else here has read the book, but you and me and maybe a couple others, let's start with the basics. What are gray communities? Generally and more specifically, why are they bad? Why is it that we built them? Why can we no longer afford to build them now?
Yeah, I mean, that is the crux of the book. So gray housing, as I call it, is conventional housing, sort of most often what people are living in, what we see in our communities. It's housing that's not really intentionally designed to improve our health, to add value to the planet in terms of helping it to continue to flourish and provide so many benefits to us. Gray housing is, it just sort of diminishes human health and planetary health. And it is not necessarily designed for the people living in it, for the community where it will be. And there's really no thought at all into the amount of resources that get manufactured and produced to go into the housing, or what happens when we need to retrofit and demolish housing. So that's, I don't know if that makes sense, John. I hope it does. That is sort of the definition to me of gray housing.
So probably the easiest thing people can relate to is lead paint. Everybody sort of knows the story on lead paint, and that's an element of gray housing, but you actually go much, much further than that. So maybe just give a quick landscape of, from lead to formaldehyde in my insulation, where.
Yeah, I mean, that's another reason why I wanted to write the book, because for me, I just see how the dots get connected. If you think about our fossil fuel industry, we often just think about it as, as necessary for our energy use in this country, but as a main contributor to greenhouse gases. But we often don't think then some of the pollutants from the fossil fuel industry, much of it then gets used from the petrochemical industry and put into products that we use in our building materials. So 11% of all the carbon emissions in this country come from manufacturing building materials. And then on top of that, we take the waste product from the fossil fuel industry and we put it back into our building products in the form of formaldehyde and other things that are really harmful to our health. And then that gets put into our housing. And so we spend 90% of our time indoors. Currently, we're spending 100% of our time basically indoors, unfortunately, but our home then becomes a really important place for our health or for ill health as we get exposed to those products that are off-gassing and disintegrating over time, particulate matter that is really harmful to our health. And what I hope people walk away from this Zoom meeting with an understanding that it's not just about me and my home being exposed to some of those chemicals and possibly to lead and other hazards, but it's the entire industry that pollutes communities in the process. And that's, really an environmental justice issue, that we are producing building materials in communities who then receive the pollution from that process, but don't benefit from those green materials, from those building materials in their homes. And then we are spending 90 to 100% of our time indoors, also impacting our own health. And then on top of that, that home then has an impact in that community and on its health. If we continue to put housing where the land is the cheapest and it feels like it's the most affordable to build, when actually it adds cost to people having to drive from that home to their job and pollute from their car or the buses or whatever vehicle they're taking to get to their job. So, it's kind of a convoluted story, John, but this is complex. And I think what we need is to think about it in its complexity, that if we could do things differently, we could have a major impact, but we continue to just build conventional homes and not take all of these other factors into consideration.
Yeah, it's interdependency even, right? All the different things that are interdependent. You talked about, you just alluded to drive to qualify. I have to point to a really burning image in the book, early in the book, where you talk about a gentleman who works at a sawmill and wakes up in the morning and realizes that his body has left an impression everywhere else is surrounded by sawdust. Just the image that leaves in your mind is really quite something. Now, in contrast to gray communities, you want to talk about, or we want to talk about, the movement wants to talk about green communities. And it's not your stereotypical definition of green that's limited to just things like renewable energy. Tell us more about what the goal is and where we want to go with green communities.
Yeah, exactly. So if just paint the reverse of that side of the coin that I just shared. I mean, green communities, yeah, exactly. We often think green and we think what I call green bling. You know, we think solar panels, or we only think about energy efficiency. But, and I hope over time we can just call it housing. But right now, while we still have gray conventional housing, we have to differentiate it as we move to making all housing this way. But the promise of green is a promise that prioritizes human health and planetary health. And so if you think about the story I just told with taking the fossil fuel industry and the pollutants into our building materials, think about not using fossil fuels for our energy, therefore not having a waste stream of toxic chemicals that we shove into building products, and instead having renewable energy so that we're not polluting the communities near the fossil fuel industry. Within a 3-mile radius of all of our power plants, 6 million people live there, and 40% of those people earn incomes of $18,000 or less, and they're predominantly Black and people of color. So a green community is one where we take that into consideration. We do not want to have a situation where people have to live near these industries. And we now especially know just how important it is to have a house that, or an apartment that we can afford to be in and that we're not at risk. So green communities is thinking about all of those touch points of the housing sector in a way that is done better to improve our health, to take into consideration planetary health and the future of this country in terms of children's health.
You know, I'm going to divert just a second. A couple of weeks ago, 60 Minutes ran a story on Africa Town. It was the last slave ship, and the town that came of that last slave ship that ever came to the United States was Africa Town, and it's still there. And at one point after slavery ended, it became one of the thriving communities: Black-owned businesses, wealth creation, home ownership. You know, things were really going well. And then 60 Minutes comes down today into Africa Town, and what do we see? We see that the main business corridor that once was is now home to an interstate freeway. Mm-hmm. And the edges of Africa Town are now populated by heavy industrial and commercial work. This is a great example of what may have actually been a green community that is now a gray community due to policy choices, due to systems and environments that now surround Africa Town. This is what you're talking about, right? We can't have gray communities anymore because of the impact it has on people's well-being and health. You know, from our perspective at Vitalist Health Foundation, if I was to go there and start drawing blood, I would find elevated levels of cortisol in every single person in Africa Town. And that means diabetes, overweight, stroke, heart disease, the whole gamut. So we shouldn't be doing this anymore. We should be building green communities. And you have been, along with a huge team of people, have been working on green community standards and on making these projects a reality across the country. So here's the small question. What are the obstacles that pop up? What are the things that are stopping us from doing this? Right? Small question.
It is a small question. And the small answer is we prefer to do the things we know how to do. It's really hard to break habits. You know, I'm sure you have something in your life you're trying to do differently. I certainly am trying to wake up and exercise, and I've been terrible about it. And so we just do what we do. I wake up and have coffee and start my day instead of doing exercise. I can't break that habit. And that's true for the construction and housing industry. You know, it's easier for us to just keep doing the things that we do. And to do something new and different is perceived to be very risky. And risk typically means in this country, more expensive.
So the green communities movement and the green communities building standards, can I say it was sort of an outgrowth or a progression from LEED standards to green standards?
Yeah, you definitely can. Although the root of the origin of the green communities actually came from Portland. So they actually had the first green housing standard that Seattle then took and created and expanded on. And green communities took what Seattle had done as its basis, because LEED at that point was all about commercial buildings. And it was really difficult to adapt even to any kind of housing, let alone housing that needed to be affordable for everybody. So you're sort of right, you're half right.
But was the idea of building that standard a way of getting people acclimated to that change and actually giving them something to aim for?
Exactly. And the analogy to LEED is right on, because I was at Enterprise Community Partners at the time, a national community development intermediary, and we were seeing green building arrive on the scene, so to speak. And we knew that the affordable housing community was going to get left behind. That LEED for commercial buildings, all of the benefits were going to go to owners and tenants of really expensive real estate. When in fact, the benefits of green building, even that the US Green Building Council was admitting to at the time, were these great health benefits, were lower operating costs. So that's why the real estate industry was building green. It wasn't necessarily that they all believed in its moral and ethical reason. It was because they were going to make more money. So we wanted
to get higher rents. You can get higher rents. Yeah,
exactly. So we wanted those benefits for the housing sector. We wanted those benefits for people who really needed them, and so that was the motivation.
So I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about that journey, but while I do, I want to remind folks who are participating, don't just sit there. You got a way to give us some questions and answer some questions that we can ask Dana. We're going to keep talking, but you keep thinking about gray to green and what your questions might be, particularly as it pertains to your own experience in this work, in trying to get things to happen. Because Dana and her teams, and I say teams because she's had a multitude of roles in this work, which, I mean, they range, Dana, really, don't they? From like project manager all the way to, a much larger policy work. So there's lots to tap into with Dana. So please, folks, get into the Q&A and ask us some questions, and we'll get to those. But while we're waiting for that, Dana, take us, the short version of the journey from idea to where we are today and what's going on with green building standards and green building criteria, green community criteria, excuse me.
Yeah, no, definitely. So that was the motivation. We wanted the benefits from green building to be to bring into the affordable housing sector. We knew that Portland and Seattle had done some great things. Austin, Texas was also on the cutting edge of this. And we created the green communities criteria. And long story short, what we wanted to do was to make sure that the criteria were on par with the US Green Building Council's criteria. So we wanted it to be as rigorous, seen as a high standard of excellence. And we partnered with the Natural Resource Defense Council to make sure that the green communities criteria were not greenwashing. We weren't lowering the bar for housing. We were raising the bar for housing to take it from gray to green, from conventional to high performing. But the bottom line was we could not risk any less number of housing units being delivered or preserved. So that was the dual tension that we had that USGBC did not have. We had to keep building and preserving housing to remain affordable, but we wanted to raise the standard. And so the green communities criteria have really been this framework, sort of 8 principles of how to provide holistically better housing for everyone involved, as we first talked about, from where we get the products and where we get our energy source to our living situations and to the communities where we're putting the housing. And the framework was meant to grow. So the very first criteria that I was most involved with, kind of even the playing field for people. And then every couple of years, it's been revised 4 times now. We've done more. We've done more to make it work better for existing housing. We've done more to make it work better for rural housing. We've done better to make it work now for communities facing climate change. So it can continue to expand and meet tomorrow's challenges.
I got a real softball question for you here because it totally plays to your strengths. We have someone who's asked, practically speaking, how can we integrate the green stuff like LEED with equity and affordability? Do you, Dana, have a tool for that?
That's exactly what the Green Communities Criteria, and you can Google Green Communities Criteria and you will get the 2020 version of the Green Communities Criteria. And I'm no longer involved in it. So this isn't an advertising for me, but it's a framework that at the core of it centers equity. And in its last revision, centered racial equity. And so you can take a look at the Green Communities Criteria 2020 and see how you can get the benefits of green building, so to speak, with the racial and economic justice pieces as well.
To the point of that question, Dana, you don't pull any punches in this book. There are at least 2 chapters that I can think of that are really dedicated to racism and social equity. Since that question has now come up, if you would, give us your sense of where equity fits into the puzzle.
Yeah, it fits at the center of the puzzle, or I'm not much of a puzzler, so maybe it's the four corners. You know, it's those things that you put down first to get the puzzle created, and so, you know, for hopefully everyone on the call understands that housing has been at the root of racism, racist policies and structures in this country. Would urge you to read books like The Color of Law or Race for Profit as solid kind of back stories to give you solid footing on why housing, and you alluded to it, John, as well, that from the very beginning, you know, in terms of how we used our policies to say Indigenous people who have been in the Americas forever, here's a land use policy that you now have to go to the other side of the Mississippi River and set up your homes there. Like that's our origin story in the United States. And then you mentioned Africa Town. I mean, we could spend X number of webinars talking about this. So for me, housing, to be an anti-racist as we're learning how to be in this country, our housing, any of our housing work has to put racial justice front and center.
Absolutely, thank you for that. So you've been at this for, the Green Communities Criteria has been going on for X how many years?
2005.
Okay,
15.
So you're pretty clear at this point on what the challenges are. Talk about them.
Yeah, so we still have a perception that green means more expensive. We have a perception that we can't afford to do anything different than what we're currently doing. So one of the challenges is simply that we have to change our mindset and realize that there is a better way of doing this. So let's say we commit and we make that change. Another challenge is that we haven't really changed the way we finance housing in this country to make it affordable. We still I don't think really believe it should be for everybody. And so we have these incredibly intensive financial vehicles to even provide housing. But what is promising is that some of the lenders and investors in affordable housing understand that green is actually a better product and it's less risky. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Wells Fargo, various green low-income housing tax credit funds have been incenting green and are getting to a place where they are requiring it for certain vehicles. So we don't really have, the reason it's challenging is we don't really have a will. We don't really have the financial vehicles yet at scale. And we need to train a workforce that can not just sort of, change the light bulbs and fix the energy efficiency in a home, but who understand how to also make it healthy, who can remediate lead, who can remove moisture from homes, who can install the proper filters, who can do all these things in one fell swoop, and get paid more. Because what we know, I'm sure you see this in your line of work, John, you actually get paid more per hour if you can do energy and health improvements at the same time.
Absolutely. Now, there are a bunch of questions popping up in the chat, and we'll try to answer some of them directly, but I want to kind of go one level up from what people are talking about, because already the primary line of questioning has to do with economics, the economics of housing, and which doesn't surprise any of us, right? There are two things. I'll start with one, and then we'll go to the next. Two things that certainly many of us here in Phoenix here, or many of us here in the Valley and in Arizona here, when we talk about affordable housing, is when a developer is engaged in this process with advocates, and ultimately the developer says this magical phrase, well, it just won't pencil out. Have you met with that one? Like, pencil out as in, I as a developer, it's not gonna work out for me, therefore I can't do that. Have you run into that phrase? And if so, what's your response? How do we respond to that?
Yeah, I've definitely heard that. I mean, you hear that because of what I mentioned before in terms of this country not going full in and addressing our housing crisis, with 11 million people with very low incomes paying way more than 50% of their income just for their rent, let alone their utility and transportation costs. Like, we have a crisis. So I hear it doesn't pencil out when developers are just trying to build conventionally. So housing, to make it affordable for everyone in this country, doesn't pencil out. It requires subsidy. And we just, I think, have to come to grips with that. But I will tell you that in my 15 years of doing this work, projects pencil out better for the long haul when they meet the green communities criteria or an equivalent standard of green building, because the principle of green building is that you approach it with an integrative mindset. And so you're thinking about everything you're trying to achieve from the beginning. You're not doing the land development, the site improvements first and by themselves, and then thinking about the structure of the house, and then the interior finishes. And then, when you do things in silos, it adds up to cost more. So if projects don't pencil out because we don't have a commitment to financing housing that's affordable for everyone in this country, the way to make it pencil out is actually to take an integrated design approach and to do things in a way where you can save money but have still the high performance that will make housing healthier for everybody involved in the housing sector and more affordable to maintain. And again, going back to green commercial buildings, that is why the real estate sector embraced green. It costs less to own and operate over time. And we need housing for the long haul. And so that investment on the front end to make it green can actually help make it pencil out, and will most likely keep it affordable for the owner over time.
Oh, hi, Dana, it's Lauren. We may have lost John, so I'll continue with the questions.
Okay, great.
But what about developers who build, we've seen this in the Valley a lot, what about developers who build intending to flip their property and not own it? They are less interested in the longer return on investment. So how do we incentivize them to build a greener building when they have no intention of the longer term?
Yeah, I would love to talk at length about that, because it's a bigger issue of seeing housing in this country as a commodity rather than housing as a basic human right. And so I think we have a long ways to go, but hopefully we'll get there fast to change that narrative so that we aren't we aren't looking at housing as a commodity that we can flip and make money on. But, that is what's happening. So how do we address that? I would say for those sorts of investors, we have to address it through policy. Just and we have 27 states in this country that already require the green communities criteria in their financing for the low-income housing tax credit. So, I think for the person who's not going to get why this is important, that's where policy and rules and regulations come into play.
In Arizona, we have a unique challenge. Well, not necessarily unique. Other states have a preemption on inclusionary zoning. So in Arizona, it's illegal for a city to require affordable housing of a developer. Or if there's zoning amendments, it's illegal for them to require that. So what Phoenix and Tempe are doing is trying to build in density and height bonuses and incentivize affordable housing that way. But we have our own unique kind of crazy and AZ dimension. But and Lorene Beck asks, to add another dimension to this question, what kinds of land development code can cities change or implement that can incentivize green affordable housing? One topic of discussion in our community is the increase in building price because of requirements such as minimum parking. So what kinds of land development code can cities change and implement that can incentivize? Sort of a continuation of this theme here.
Yeah, definitely. This is a good one, and one I really enjoy talking about as a land use planner myself. And the questionnaire asked about, said parking, and I mentioned that in my book, actually, a story of a development in Chicago, I believe it was, where they were it was housing for women who had been formerly incarcerated and were getting reunited with their families. We're not going to be driving, and yet the city was requiring them to have one parking place per person. Again, this goes back to how we're financing housing. It was not for that development. They were requiring parking in case that development ever was resold as condos or market rate housing. So definitely one thing we can address through our land use policy is these parking requirements that, no matter if you're in urban or suburban areas, is really adding to the cost of development needlessly, when we as a country are trying to transition to shared mobility, more rapid transit, other ways to get around than having one car per person or 1.5 cars as some parking regulations require.
So are there organizations dedicated to promoting legislative change to promote green affordable housing? Any national or even state organizations that you know about?
Yeah, there are. I'm more familiar with the national ones. So certainly Enterprise Community Partners would be one, but LISC is working on this as well. You have the National Low Income Housing Coalition, who has a lot to say about this issue, particularly when it comes to disaster recovery. So they're also advancing green standards related to how we recover and repair housing after disasters, whether it's fires or floods.
Okay, let's see, we have some other good questions. Let's see, what are the 3 pillars for building a more just future as you detail in one of the book's final chapters: racial justice, economic justice, environmental and climate justice? Can you talk more about those 3 pillars for a just future?
Yeah, definitely. Again, I would say the way I see the world, and when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, so bear with me. But, at the very least, we need tens of millions of new housing that's affordable to everybody, whether that's brand new or we're retrofitting and preserving housing, because half of the housing stock in this country is older than 40 years old. So we have a situation where we have an aging existing housing stock, and we just don't have enough housing to house everybody affordably. So knowing that we have to do that, then I think the way to go about that is to center racial justice. And by that, I mean to completely rethink the housing and community development sector. We cannot have anti-racist housing if the architects and designers of our housing are white and privileged and have no lived experience when it comes to the need for housing in this country. So it starts with who's designing and building our housing. And that's not just the people constructing it, which we also, given how much housing we need in this country, we need to train a new workforce. But it's also, as we were addressing the building materials sector, we have an opportunity to grow the manufacturing sector for clean materials. And that could mean very family sustaining wages if we promote the owners of those manufacturing companies to be Black or persons of color from communities where they stand to benefit the most. So I feel like I'm going off topic a little bit, but the racial justice pillar of a green community extends well beyond just thinking about the four walls and the roof when we talk about housing. And that's true for the economic justice as well. We have to think about all the materials that we need for housing, the actual construction of the housing, the maintenance of the housing, and the tens of millions of units that we need to retrofit. We have to prioritize who we're bringing into the workforce that will benefit from those jobs and that training. And then again, I think just stopping the pollution, stopping the proliferation of the petrochemical industry, the fossil fuel industry, because we can't have green communities if all we're doing is to continue to pollute alongside them or alongside other existing communities. So, those for me are things that we haven't talked about enough when it comes to our housing sector, but as we transition to green communities are at the center of that transition.
Very good. So we have our host back. He fell off the
Hey.
internet. Now he's back. And I won't keep what questions we already asked John, but you can go back at it.
It wouldn't be 2020 if I didn't lose my internet connection, right? That's how everything goes.
Not at all.
I'm now operating off my cell phone, so we'll see how this goes. So I did actually stare at the screen for a while, like, are they frozen or am I? Which is it? I don't know. Anyway, thank you. I'm sorry. I don't know how much I missed. I do apologize. Also, Lauren, the chat box is now wiped out for me, so I cannot see any of the previous questions. So for unasked questions, if you could reiterate those to me, or if the audience wants to do that, terrific. Where we left off, or where I left off, you guys had a great time, I'm sure, was talking about the economics. And so I don't know if you got to this, but one of the things that you called out in the book that I think is really important to talk about is what was detailed in the book as the wrong pocket problem. So if I build a certain way so that my residents are healthier, it's the healthcare industry that benefits. If I build a certain way such that utility costs are low, it's the person who occupies the building who benefits, not me. And that to me is my understanding of the wrong pocket problem. And so did this already get talked about, by the way?
No.
Okay. So let's talk about the wrong pocket problem, because you have dealt with it and you have actually come up with some creative solutions on that front. So
yeah,
could you talk a
definitely.
little bit about how to deal with this?
Yeah, and you described it perfectly. And I have to say, I hope another thing people take away from today is that the premise of this book is that we're all connected. And so providing gray communities harms all of us. Transitioning to green communities can benefit all of us. And that's where we need to go as a society. So even that question of wrong pocket, is frustrating, but it's a reality. And I know that. So the pocket of the developer who pays the first cost to build the green housing may not understand, though, that in using green, healthy materials that may have a slight first cost is producing an environment where the people living there are going to be healthier, and they are not going to be needing to go to the emergency room. 40% of all the asthma episodes are caused by preventable triggers in our homes. So my investment as a developer for little to nothing, but a thought process that has me specifying green healthy materials means that the person living in the building I've designed and created for them is going to be healthier. And that means they can pay rent month to month. That means they're going to want to stay there. They're going to want to live there. And so it's actually not a wrong pocket. It's a very selfish pocket, but then the healthcare industry does benefit too. So how do we capture the benefits of the healthcare industry? And John, it's like, you could speak better to that than I could. But what we're saying to the healthcare industry is that there actually is a benefit by not having repeated customers to their emergency rooms, because the housing is now preventing the need to go to the hospital for, let's say, asthma or some type of cardiovascular issue. So we have been engaging, and the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative is a great entity to Google, GHHI. They're working in at least 20 cities and states with the healthcare industry and cities to braid the financial vehicles that are available to us to build more healthy housing. Long answer, John, sorry.
I mean, it's a tricky one. It's a very tricky one. Now, you've also, you took it from another perspective, and that was, and can you tell the story a little bit about the Green Communities Offset Fund? Because that was a very creative solution to this wrong pocket problem.
Yeah, it's actually one of my favorite things. It doesn't exist anymore. But when we started Green Communities, what we said was, we will deliver health, economic, and environmental benefits. So I knew that meant we're going to have to tell the country whether or not green has actually provided these benefits. And we were able to do that on the health and on the economic front quite easily, actually. But what we had a trouble at first doing was proving the environmental benefits. Well, what we realized was that if you met the Green Communities criteria, you were actually reducing carbon emissions by about 2 tons. I think that's right, if I remember correctly, per home, per unit. And so we bought an offset methodology and applied it to affordable housing so that someone who was looking to offset their carbon emissions, and we felt strongly that we didn't want to allow someone to purchase offsets who were just frivolously emitting pollution and wanting to feel better about it. We wanted people who were committed to reducing their carbon footprint as much as possible and just needed an additional offset. And so we worked with the green real estate business and allowed them to purchase offsets through the affordable housing sector. And so they could purchase a credit, and that money went back to the owner of the property to make additional carbon emissions reductions, which for the most part meant installing solar panels or other renewable energy technologies that they otherwise would not have been able to afford to do.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just a great story. And to your point about, yes, I could probably speak a little bit to the health benefits of different housing moves. I know there's a famous developer in Atlanta who literally accidentally sited one of his apartment complexes near a walking trail. And are you familiar with this guy?
No.
Yeah, so all of a sudden he realized that turnover was much lower. And that residents were much happier, and a community garden was soon negotiated between the residents and the property owner. And he says, now I always build next to walking trails, and I just put the community garden in right away. So so developers are learning, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with developers, but now back to this community offset fund. It also sort of, to me, I know you said that the money goes straight back to the owner, and the owner uses it for other energy efficiency improvements or other green improvements. But it brings me also to another part of the book that that was not unfamiliar to me, but might be to others. Later on in the book, you detail a project called Trolley Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And there is a chart in the book, and it's a very long chart. It is the 21 different sources in the financing stack for that development. There's no way that gray developments are this complex. Why are affordable housing in general, and particularly green communities projects so incredibly complex in their financing? And how could we do better?
Yeah, we do better by committing as a country to provide housing for everyone that they can afford, period. If we did that, we would galvanize whatever resources we needed within the federal government or otherwise and provide the adequate subsidy. Right now, there's about 40 of all of our housing, 138 units of housing in this country, about 44 million of it is rented out. For people who would be eligible for rental assistance, only 1 in 4 of them are actually receiving the assistance. So that's just one illustration of why, if I'm trying my hardest to develop housing that someone with a really low income, it's not their fault. This isn't about people's failures. This is the fact that we are paying wages in this country that are not keeping up with the cost of living. It is our systemic failure, not a personal failure. And so we aren't committed to making housing affordable for everyone, such that there's a gap. At the end of the day, conventional or green, there's gonna be a gap. There's 21 sources of funding for gray affordable housing, just like green affordable housing. The difference is if I'm providing green affordable housing like Trolley Square, and I find a way to turn a courtyard into a cistern underneath that can capture rainwater for free and use it at low or no cost then for flushing my toilets and other uses, I am saving money. And I've turned space that would be nothing into this kind of moneymaker for the developer. So green development, I've seen this 1,000 times over, find more ways to fill the gap because they've thought creatively and integratively from the get-go about how to get it done. Gray housing, I think you just cut more costs, right? Like you just keep making the units smaller, using less expensive materials to make it work. And what we're saying is that's not good enough. We need more housing. We need to retrofit the existing housing. Let's do it right. In one fell swoop, we can address all of these things we've been talking about today. Oh, John, you're on mute, the dreaded mute.
Pop quiz time. Damn it. So I've lost my internet and you had to tell me I was on mute. This is not good performance. I am no longer Lauren's favorite moderator. All right. It's pop quiz time. I did not prepare you for this. Are you willing, Dana, to, first of all, you can give us the national number, but are you willing to guess what percentage of renters in Arizona are paying more than 30% of their income for housing?
Ooh, I don't know the answer to that. I should have prepared. Let's see.
You couldn't have. I didn't let you.
I would.
Nationally, what do you think it is
nationally? I would say 60%.
So statewide, it is 45%.
Okay.
Without question, there are zip codes that are easily 60%. Surprising number to you? Obviously not.
No, no, it's not. It's everywhere. Take any state in this country and it's very similar numbers.
Homeowners. What percentage of homeowners are paying more than 30% of their income on homeownership?
On their mortgage. Interesting. I'm less familiar with that number, so I'm going to go 30%.
In urban areas, yes. Statewide, 22%. So almost 1 in 4 Arizonans who own their homes are paying more than 30% of their income. 45% of those who rent. Like you said, it's sort of an epidemic of its own.
It is. It is. Yeah. So, the learning for me, John, is that number, like I can see people that I have talked to, Bernice Aquino or Charlotte, or, like I've been in so many people's homes where they manage, and we've seen this in COVID, right? Like the numbers of people who have become homeless because of COVID could be much higher, but we are scraping by. We are doing everything we possibly can not to miss our rent payment, not to miss our mortgage payment. That's what we do in this country. And particularly that's what Black people and people of color do best in this country. They pay their bills. So what does it mean if you're paying more than 22, you said, for your mortgage, more than 40%? It means you are scraping by. And
It means you're making horrible trade-offs.
It totally does. It does. Yeah.
Am I going to eat well, or am I going to eat poorly? Am I going to pay my rent, or am I going to get my prescriptions filled? Am I going to, right? It's on and on and on.
Yeah. So here we are engaging in an energy sector that is emitting carbon into our planet at rates we can no longer afford to do. We're heading to a climate crisis. And we know how to bring everybody's utility bill down so that they would be saving hundreds of dollars a month sometimes, but hundreds of dollars a year. And we're refusing to do it. So we're not addressing the climate crisis, and we're not addressing making housing more affordable people. To me, that's nonsensical. That's not fiscally prudent. That's not good financial, dealings, right?
Yeah, well, again, you've written a brilliant book, one that I recommend everybody run out and get at Changing Hands Bookstore on January 19th, I believe it is, right? It concludes with your call for a housing moonshot. 6-point plan, ensuring that we no longer pretend not to have these two crises, the climate crisis and the housing crisis. One that's designed to really make solid national progress. This is something that, like you said, you've been working on for decades to get to happen and at project level, but now you're calling for the national level. Talk about the components of that moonshot. I think there are 6, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you've heard me say one of them over and over. We need a national commitment. Within the next decade, we just have to commit to making sure that everybody, regardless of race or income or ability or disability, gender, can afford a home. And then the second thing I talk about is installing a national coordinator. So a lot of different federal agencies have programs that incent greener development or support more affordable housing. It adds to that 21, the stack of 21 vehicles, because they're coming from all different agencies. So we need someone to coordinate that, streamlining, make it work better. The third point we've talked about today is we have to curb pollution. Our indoor air quality is causing us to go to the hospital, and our outdoor air quality is doing the same. We've lived through 2020 and we understand the importance of clean air. We need to do better and curb pollution. The fourth is we must preserve any and all housing. One of the questions addressed that. We have to preserve the existing housing stock in this country. It cannot be turned into a commodity that gets flipped to make $1. And then the fifth being train and fund a green housing workforce. We need economic vitality in this country. We need more jobs. We need a stronger economy. Let's do it by training and putting to work a green workforce. And then let's hold the people in power accountable. And that's something everybody on this call can do. Know how they're voting on issues related to housing and climate. Make sure that they hold up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, you're gonna think that I just look at the pictures in your book, which there aren't a lot, but there are some.
No, there's not.
And I believe there's an excellent graphic in there about the workforce. What's possible if we start to think about local economic impact from affordable housing, what it means in terms of the number of homes, what it means in terms of local jobs, what it means in terms of taxes and other revenue and local income. And when you really put the whole picture together, it's very compelling. So why aren't we seeing this type of discussion and dialogue? Is it that same thing about people just are used to doing the same thing over and over again?
That's part of it. And then we're better at looking at things in silos. So we think about housing as four walls and a roof. We think about jobs as something totally different. I don't, you know, it can only be a tech job, I think. I'm not sure what's going on with our job situation. Like we deal with things in silos. And so we don't understand that by addressing things together and integrating our solutions, we can have such a much bigger win. 7.2 million households earning very low incomes need housing that's affordable. If we provided them green housing, $842 billion in local income, 11 million local jobs. Why aren't we doing this? We're not connecting the dots, and we're not choosing to.
Yeah, that's crazy. Hey, I know we got to wrap up, but I'm going to ask you one more question. Of those 6 components we just discussed in the Moonshot, are you willing to pick 1 or 2 that you think are the most doable and the most imperative, given the whole business, political, and philanthropic climate that we have here?
Yeah, you know, for me, because now I'm at a private foundation, I've chosen to focus on the existing housing stock. I just feel we can't lose another unit of housing. If someone's already living there in obsolete housing that is making them ill, that is increasing our carbon emissions, let's go there. Let's go to the rural communities. Let's go to the indigenous communities first, and let's preserve the affordability of that housing while we increase the performance. That's where I'd put my money and get to work. And that's what we're doing at JPB.
Okay, we're going to get on that here in Arizona, and we'll be calling you for all the help we need. Dana Bourland, thank you so very much for spending this hour with us. Well, with everybody else. I was only here for part of it, but thank you for being here for all of it, for answering the questions. Thank you for writing a fantastic book. Again, I urge everybody, get to Changing Hands, pre-order it, go and buy it on January 19th. It's From Green to Gray Communities. It's a great book. Thank you, Dana. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate being here with you.
And
Lauren, back to you.
Yeah, I'll just step in to thank you as well. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dana. And a reminder about our final events of this semester. So Thursday, December 10th, tomorrow at 8 a.m., get your coffee ready. Foreign Policy Magazine is hosting a virtual dialogue with Michael Crow and other global leaders on empowering leaders for a global future. And then next Friday from 10 to 11, the Emmy award-winning journalist and Global Futures Fellow Frank Sesno is going to lead a discussion with John Morton. He was responsible for Obama's energy and climate policies and strategies. So the topic is climate policy in action the next 4 years. They intend to focus on what the Biden administration needs to do and must do to confront the climate crisis. Learn more about these events at sustainability.asu.edu/events. And thank you so much, everyone. And please buy the book at our beloved local bookstore, Changing Hands. Thank you.